I was born in 91. I have no memories of the 80s, obviously, but through existing in the world, I have a nostalgia for something I have never experienced. And the WNUF Halloween Special is like a nostalgia shot right in the veins. WNUF Halloween Special is a television news network's Halloween special from 1987. I honestly think if you have not watched the movie and you love horror, you should just watch it before I say anything else. It's a found footage horror movie, one of the best I've ever seen. It came out in 2013 and was primarily directed by Chris LaMartina. It starts with the evening news and then goes into a Halloween broadcast where a reporter, Frank Stewart, goes into a haunted house with a team of experts. The commercials are still intact, adding to the realism. The main storyline involves Frank Stewart interacting with his team of experts, Father Matherson, and paranormal experts Lewis and Claire Berger. They have segments explaining the crime that took place in the Weber house. The live parts of the broadcast almost immediately deteriorate once they are inside the house as spooky things happen. This is a pitch black comedy at its heart, though with an ending that I guess I'll call scary, but not scary in a way that I was expecting. I have a lot of thoughts on the WNUF Halloween Special that may or may not all go together, so bear with me and this disjointed video. To get started though, I'm painting with gouache on hot press watercolor paper. These are my reference photos. This is the real poster for the movie. I wanted to keep in the spirit of that poster and that I didn't want to show anything, but I wanted it to look like what the cover of the VHS tape might look like if this was really released by the WNUF TV station, if that station was real. I drew inspiration from the covers of the VHS tapes they have on Red Letter Media's Best of the Worst, Wheel of the Worst episodes. Man, that was a mouthful. Anyways, in those specific episodes, they have a lot of instructional tapes and weird kid shows where the covers are often like poor quality or black and white, and they're stills or like photos of whatever guy's in the video, and the text tends to be like printed on a home printer. I think if this was a real special, it would have fallen into that kind of tape. I will not lie, this was a hard painting for me. I think Frank Stewart is the oldest person I've ever painted. I wanted the end result to be photorealistic, but I accept the loss and I hope the finished painting gives the VHS vibe I was going for. Explaining the plot of WNUF doesn't necessarily inform someone on how the movie actually is. It's one of those rare times that I could have believed that this was a real broadcast, at least for part of the first section. If I hadn't seen this on Shudder, I probably would have been fooled. I think my age demographic helped me be tricked easier than others though, because if you're young enough to have not watched TV in the 80s but old enough to have phantom memories of the 90s, it's harder to distinguish where that line is, where it's too good to have been real. In the checking the kids' candy segment, the bells went off for me when the cop says, "You and your little monsters." So that's about when I started to know for sure that this was fake. I'm not sure why. The local news segments and commercials are the real backbone of the film. And it's one of those things that you'll either love it or you won't. It's an integral part of the film because without the commercials, the themes of the story and the build-up to the climax don't work. And the commercials are amazing. I get tied on what my favorite one is. I think it's probably Feel the Steel, the one for the hard rock music compilation. I love the fake metal song, Heaven is Afraid. I also quite like the Dial a Monster commercial. They're all honestly great. The demolition one was so close to being a real ad that I laughed out loud at the last line of it. I don't know where else to say this in the video, but in the local news segment, when they are talking about the child being murdered because he was mistaken as a Vietnamese soldier by a veteran, I died when they label his mom as mother of slain trick-or-treater. I don't know why that got me. But this all being said, I know some people are just not going to like it. They're going to get annoyed at the commercials, and I don't blame them. In rewatching WNUF in preparation for this video, I remembered and missed cable, and yet by the end of the film, I was so frustrated. You know, that frustrated feeling you get when you watch a movie on TV and you're at the climax and it keeps cutting to commercials. But I think that's kind of the point. To be a genuine period piece, it needs to follow through with what it set up, and it does. A lot of found footage movies don't. They abandon their conceit after a certain point, leading to a lot of scenes of people running around with cameras while the impossible supposedly happens for real. WNUF commits to being a news holiday broadcast before being a movie with a clear narrative arc. It's funny, but part of me buying into the authenticity of WNUF is that I totally remember when the ghost hunters came to the Buffalo terminal when I was in high school, and they did a live Halloween night special where you could watch the cameras online. I guess my point is it's not a big jump for me to believe that they would be doing specials like this in the 80s too. It would be a crime not to mention how Paul Fahrenkoven's, I'm sorry, probably butchered your name, how his performance as Frank Stewart is the true heart of the film. He is the most lovable, smug jerk through the whole damn thing. He reminds me of Phil Connors from Groundhog's Day meets like the late Cameron Mitchell. The scene where he is interviewing his live audience about ghosts and this girl with devil horns is just rambling, and he is so condescending and wide-eyed and annoyed. It's adorable. He's so much of the straight man in the situation that it bends off the edge. I also do love in that moment when the girl dressed up as Dorothy says she saw a ghost with a top hat on, while that goth skeleton man with a top hat is just moving around behind her looking into the camera. Frank is also such a booming asshole to the Burgers and Father Matheson inside the house. As it goes, you can tell Frank and the producers had this plan. And that plan falls apart. And you can see Frank going from trying to get the experts to listen to him to do what they need to do to follow through with that plan, and yet at the same time getting excited because something unscripted happened. Also, I have nowhere to put this because I don't really have anything to say about it, but Claire and Louise Berger are obviously modeled after Ed and Lorraine Warren, who I take a stance on that they are grifters, but to each their own, though Louis Berger totally does look like Ray Bradbury, and in interviews in different podcasts, Chris LaMartina mentions that too, so I'm glad that he really kind of was, sort of was, unintentionally was. Throughout the film, they have these little segments in the local news part and the Halloween Special part about lots of different things. The ones that are important are not given extra weight. So by the end of the film, you're still shocked if you've been watching it casually and haven't put together the pieces. Basically, the Christian movement against Halloween Harvest kills Frank and his crew at the end of the film. And there's this little coda of the next week's broadcast where they say that they are still missing, leading the audience to wonder if they are watching the tape made by the killers. This whole thing is foreshadowed surprisingly well. They have a segment during the local news part about a group called Harvest, founded by a woman named Angela Harris. The segment is an interview where Angela talks about Halloween being Satan's night, and it's full of blasphemy, and she warns that candy is prayed over by witches, so it's dangerous. She also warns that there is a war for your soul, and the streets are a battlefield. She is extremely unhinged, and Donna Miles, the reporter interviewing her, grounds the scene by looking at her like she is nuts the whole time. Later on, they tell the murder that happened in the house, and it's basically the Amityville Horror. A kid killed his parents and blamed it on a Ouija board. And as the chaos is happening during the live broadcast, they cut to a segment on Satanists in the county. Most importantly, though, a man attacks Frank before they enter the house, yelling at them about how they're all going to hell. And during the seance, a woman, presumably Angela, calls in to say that they're all blasphemous. Nuts and bolts wise, the film toes the line with playing at both sides. Is it supernatural or is it not? And what is actually shown on screen? When they first get into the house, Claire Berger reacts to it being evil and they lose their cat Shadow almost immediately. The Berger sound equipment picks up an EVP of someone saying leave, but nothing is physically shown that's spooky, just heard. There's a loud bang at one point, and when they go back into the room, someone destroyed the sound equipment. The cat is killed off screen and thrown down the stairs during the seance scene, making the crew wonder if the house is really haunted, but making the Bergers accuse Frank of having the crew kill their cat. It's easy to think the house is really going to turn out to be haunted, just as much as it's easy to believe that the crew is really making everything happen behind the scenes. And it's also easy to believe that someone else none of them know about is there. It all works very well. In moving into my complicated thoughts about WNUF Halloween Special, there's a Lindsay Ellis video about nostalgia in the 80s where she talks about this idea of deconstructive nostalgia. Nostalgia that is critical of the past while still being comforting. I think that WNUF falls into this category. In the background, it references and satirizes things like politicians denying climate change, a thing that they've been doing for decades. It pulls no punches with the subtle sexism and general morals of the 80s. Patriotism and rugged individualism are lurking around in the localization-style commercials and Death Wish-style movie trailers. Stranger danger and anti-drug propaganda are filtered in with fun TV spots for the local dentist. I have so much respect for the filmmakers for not prettying up the 80s. Here's the thing though, WNUF is set at the height of the Satanic Panic. The McMartin preschool trial had started in 1987, same year it was set. Michelle Remembers, the book that a lot of people cite as the kickoff of the panic, came out in 1980s, and by this point, the law enforcement and general public believed it as fact and were primed to expect that Satanists were real and committed satanic ritual abuse. I'm not going to talk about what satanic ritual abuse was thought to be and the details of those things, because even though none of it actually happened, what they had convinced these kids had happened to them is sickening, and I'll link some sources below for you to read about that. In preparation for this video, I actually watched Geraldo Rivera's television special, Devil Worship, Exposing Satan's Underground, and it was mind-blowing. It's hard to fathom that people really believed that these types of Satanists were real. But they did. People went to prison over absolutely nothing. The way that Rivera's program sensationalizes the murders that have nothing to do with Satan and projects Satanism onto them is directly satirized in WNUF when they talk about the murder at the Weber house. The way that Angela Harris and Harvest talk about Satan is indistinguishable from how the McMartin parents and the priests on Geraldo's program talked about Satan at the time. It's absolutely maddening. I guess the ending of WNUF shocked me because I had forgotten how it ended. And rewatching it in 2020, it's scary because it's something that could happen. We're in what a lot of people are calling a new Satanic Panic right now with a very dumb conspiracy theory I'm not going to name. And let's not forget that the largest domestic terrorism event in American history is still the Oklahoma City bombing, which was committed by a kid radicalized by right-wing extremism and propaganda. Rewatching WNUF this time, it feels unintentionally, brutally relevant. The news still treats dangerous extremists like they are jokes, while giving them fuel to spew garbage. And you just never know when that group of silly crazies is going to start a cult, or plan to kidnap a governor, or any of the other crazy things happening. At the very, very end of the film, when Frank is tied up by Harvest and he's calling them Looney Tunes and talking back to them, you can hear Angela Harris say, "I told you, Mr. Stewart, you are the devil, not us." And she cuts his tongue out. You hear people saying all the time now that the media is really the enemy while they're doing the things that are crazy and dangerous. I'm still surprised that WNUF feels relevant now. I listened to a few podcasts with Chris LaMartina talking about WNUF, and he mentions that he never saw Ghost Watch and was inspired by the Geraldo Rivera Devil Worship Special and the Mike Randall's Halloween Special, both of which I will link below. Mike Randall's special is amazing, and it's so Halloween, and it takes place in Buffalo, so I hope more people check it out. This movie was also inspired by a lot of shot on VHS horror, and, trying to make a found footage horror movie when you don't like most found footage movies. And it works. I don't think WNUF is intentionally relevant to 2020, but it shockingly was. I also don't think it was trying to make a statement about now by comparing us to the past, but it just so happens that the past continues to repeat itself. And in a world where we are still obsessed with 80s nostalgia, WNUF does it in the most realistic, genuine, and hysterical way I have ever seen.